Has it ever happened to you that you start to doubt everything you thought was real in your life? Maybe it's something to do with religion or politics, or maybe someone you had complete trust in let you down in a brutal way, and that made you question what or who else is a total lie in your life. Well, that happened to me, but in my case it turned out that someone very close to me, someone I loved and admired, turned out to be a total monster. That completely messed up my life, to the point of making me distrust everything and everyone around me. When I was a sophomore in high school, my dad started something he called Project Alpha in our garage, but he never went into detail about what it really was. He just said it was his business, and that everything that happened there had to remain a secret. He even insulated the walls of the garage, which made me think that his work must be pretty weird or something dangerous, but I didn't dig too deep. I figured it was all conspiracy stuff and such, since my dad used to be a big fan of that stuff, and I figured that's where it was going. I couldn't judge him for being half weird. I myself had a group of friends who were a mixture of crazies and certain perversions, and they often talked about gross stuff they found on the internet. I used to stay away whenever the topic came up because I'm not very active on the internet in the first place generally. I would just look up NFL or NBA recaps, aside from gossiping on social networks like Twitter or Facebook, but nothing more than that. One fine day, my friend Zach started talking about something I had never heard of before, and I hadn't been able to get the idea out of my head since: the dark web. What he was saying about it was terrifying. Ads for hired thugs, stores selling every kind of drug imaginable, organ sales, and other creepy craziness. I don't know why, but somehow what he was saying started to really intrigue me. Was there really such a place on the internet? So that weekend we agreed that he would show us what he meant and what the deep web was all about. When Saturday finally came, we all arrived at Zach's house on time, so without wasting any time we went into his room and he showed us how he managed to access that part of the internet. And it wasn't long before we all realized that he wasn't kidding. All those horrible things he had mentioned were right there, and we were all very shocked to see the amount of illegal stuff that was all over the place like it was nothing. There were ads offering drugs of all kinds, some I had never heard of before. We also visited a page where there was an extensive collection of grotesque pictures of people killed by the police in confrontations, chases, and the like. Zach told us that all of these photos were from police files, and it made me wonder, how does someone get access to FBI files and just post them like that? It was completely insane. After about 20 minutes of scrolling, Zach found a link to a live stream that had no name. This piqued everyone's curiosity, so we didn't hesitate to click on the link. Immediately, the screen went completely black, and suddenly we found ourselves looking at a digital clock that was counting down. There was a sort of tension in the air, and when it reached 0, the screen went completely dark. For the next 30 seconds, all we could hear was rough, heavy breathing, and we were all very intrigued. Suddenly, a flash of light appeared, probably from a flashlight, and revealed a very strange guy. He was wearing a clown mask, but a very ugly one, a top hat, a fancy suit, and a cape. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear it was real. When this strange guy opened his mouth, his voice sounded weird and distorted, like he wanted to hide who he was. He said something like, "Good evening, thanks for joining us. We have a good show for you today." And he called himself Happy Harry. Hearing that name, we thought he was dealing with some kind of magic act, humor, or anything related, but instead, the guy was about to unleash a real horror show. Suddenly, the screen changed and we saw a small room with red walls. In the back were two women. One was quite obese and the other was, let's just say she was more attractive. Both were trapped against the wall, hanging by both arms with chains. At that moment, Happy Harry approached the obese woman and started touching her face in a very rough and disturbing way. He said something like, "You're ugly, creatures like you don't deserve to be here, only the pretty ones." Then he looked at the other woman and asked her if she agreed, but she said nothing. They both looked terrified, and frankly, it didn't look like something faked, it didn't look like an act. "I have something special for you, honey," he said to the attractive girl. "But first, let's deal with the fat, ugly one," she continued. I started to get nervous, wishing this was all just some weird show, some setup to entertain. But with all the craziness we'd seen on the dark net up to that point, I doubted this was it. Happy Harry asked for applause, and a pair of hands appeared from outside the chamber, cheering him on. After that, he walked over to the overweight woman and wielded a pair of huge garden shears, saying, "Too bad you're not prettier, then I wouldn't have to do this." At that point, he started doing something unthinkable. He started cutting the woman on different parts of her body, and the screams that followed were deafening and absolutely chilling. My friends and I were paralyzed, and one of my friends started vomiting from disgust. Then I watched as this guy pulled out a chainsaw. I know this sounds ridiculous, but I swear I was serious. It was a real chainsaw. I felt lost and dizzy when I heard the sound of the chainsaw start up, and at that moment, the overweight woman passed out from shock, while the other one couldn't stop crying from panic. Then Happy Harry turned off the chainsaw and yelled for a whip to be passed to her. Out of nowhere, an invisible assistant threw him a whip, and he began to use it in the most brutal way imaginable against the crying girl. At that moment, I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my mouth. We were all completely terrified, disgusted, outraged, and in shock. Her attack was so horrible that from so much twitching and writhing in pain, the girl's chains gave out and she collapsed to the floor. Now it was my turn to vomit from the panic and horror I felt. What was worse, that broadcast had over 6,000 people logged on, and most of the comments were horrifying. People seemed completely fascinated with the atrocity that was happening on screen. It was sickening. At that point, Edgard, another of my friends who was there, wanted to write a comment to insult all those sick people and threaten to call the police. But Zach stopped him right away, warning him not to even think of doing such a thing, as they could trace where the message came from and retaliate. We were all more terrified now, and Edgar told Zach that he would call the police anyway, and we all agreed. Then Edgar pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911, but to our horror, the call was forwarded to an unknown number, and suddenly a distorted voice, exactly like Happy Harry's, spoke to us. If I were you, I wouldn't do that. Edgard. In that instant, we all froze. How come this guy mentioned my friend? Then a chat box opened up on the computer, and his full name and address appeared on the screen, as well as Zach's. We all froze, completely paralyzed. Then Happy Harry, now in full transmission, walked up to the camera and said, "I have all the information I need from you, brave boy. So it looks like we'll be seeing each other soon." Then he turned to the woman again, picked up the chainsaw again, turned it back on, and I don't even want to describe what he did next to those poor women, because my stomach churns every time I remember it, but it's something that will haunt me forever. Meanwhile, Edgard was on the verge of collapse, because although Zach's name also came up, it was clear that he was the one to whom the threat was directed. Zach slammed the computer shut, and I huddled in a corner, trembling with fear. Immediately, our friends began to leave, but I decided to stay with Edgard and Zach even though I was terrified. Luckily, nothing happened that night, but none of us slept through the night, and we were a nervous wreck. The next few days, Edgar was completely disconnected. He was like a ghost, didn't pay attention in class, and was extremely quiet at the lunch table, when he was usually the most talkative. A few weeks passed, and things seemed to calm down. Edgard was back to his old self, and the dark web scare seemed to be behind him. But one Friday night, while I was watching a TV series, there was a news preview, and in it, there was a report of a homicide that had occurred just a couple of hours ago in a residential complex that was only a couple of miles from my house. I froze as I saw the reporter standing in front of Edgard's house. My heart sank to my stomach as I heard that his mother, father, and 2 brothers had been found dead, and that he was missing. At that moment, I began to shake uncontrollably. I couldn't even speak, cry, scream, nothing. My mind went blank and my body did nothing but shudder. At that very moment, I received a call from Zach, completely terrified, asking me if I had seen the news. I answered yes, my voice still shaking, and he told me that at that moment he and his family were getting their things ready to move to a relative's house in another city. And I wished him luck and told him it was definitely for the best. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. At one point, I felt the need to go to the bathroom because my stomach was a mess from so many horrible emotions: fear, sadness, and anguish. I was a nervous wreck. When I went out into the hallway, I saw my dad coming up the stairs. He was covered in mud, which I found very strange. I asked him what he had been doing, and he, with a regretful sigh, told me he was fixing a sprinkler. I told him he was doing what he had to do. Then he went to his room and I went to the bathroom. When I came out, instead of going back to my room, I was so stressed and nervous still that I started walking around the house, and suddenly I got the urge to check the basement. I don't even know why I chose that moment, but I was curious about what Dad was doing in that place and thought that going to take a look would be a good way to distract my mind and not think so much about what had happened. I went downstairs and started looking around. Everything looked the same as the last time I was there, except that some things were in different places. Then looking under the stairs, I saw something strange, a door that definitely wasn't there before, so I walked over and opened it. When I did, a light came on automatically, and what I saw left me paralyzed. It was a small room with red walls and some weird tools in the corner. There were blood-stained garden shears and a chainsaw on the wall. On a desk was a computer and a webcam. Then I saw the mask, the same scary clown mask worn by the guy we knew as Happy Harry, the monster who killed, tortured, and murdered those women, and most likely Edgard and his family as well. My heart stopped as I realized I was in the same room where I had had that horrible live broadcast weeks before. At that moment, I heard my dad yell from upstairs as he realized the basement door was open. He came down the stairs cursing, but was stunned when he saw me at the entrance to his secret room, holding the mask. I will never forget that moment. We looked at each other in an awkward silence that lasted an eternity. He didn't say anything, nor did I. I just threw the mask on the floor and walked past him, brushing his shoulder with mine. I couldn't describe what I felt at that moment. I think there were so many emotions that in the end they canceled each other out and I was basically left with nothing. It sounds strange, I know, but suddenly all the overwhelming emotions I felt that night just vanished in that instant, and I felt nothing, just emptiness, as if something in me had died. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed the police number. I didn't even bother to lock the door to my room because I wasn't afraid either. On the contrary, I felt that if my father came in and killed me, he would be doing me a huge favor. But he didn't. That same night, he was arrested. There was no need to look for him. He was in the basement, in the same room with red walls. He hadn't left there since I left him. Dad had soundproofed the walls so no one could hear what was going on there, and my friend Edgard and the two women from the live broadcast were buried in our garden. Their bodies, or what was left of them, were piled on top of each other, as if they were just garbage to him. That explained why my dad often stayed working in the garden overnight. It turned out that he had taken on the character of Happy Harry the Clown on the dark web because he confessed to murdering a man in 1996. He was a children's party clown who called himself that. It has been 7 years since I found out the truth about him. I have not been to see him in prison once. That man is not my father. I don't know that disgusting guy. My father was a hard-working, decent man who loved and admired me, not that sadistic, repulsive monster who will soon be executed by lethal injection. I would like to say that I feel bad about this, but I do not. All I feel is concern that perhaps some diabolical gene has been passed on to me. I fear that someday I too will break and end up being the same kind of monster he is. At least I'm reassured to know that Happy Harry is no longer a threat to my friends or anyone else. But I always wonder who is the one holding the camera. Having a little free time in the library was my only escape from the rampage at home. My mom's new boyfriend was a real jerk. He was always criticizing me for everything, and although there was no hitting or anything as extreme as that, He had a way of talking to her that made me think he wasn't a good guy for her at all. I wish she had had the courage to stand up to him, but she couldn't seem to live without a man by her side. That day, the library was super quiet. Everyone in the place already knew me and let me do my thing. The Wi-Fi connection was great because I could do my homework and surf at the same time. What I love about this village library is that they don't have a big budget, so they don't have a lot of internet security measures. It means you can access pages that in a bigger, more modern place you wouldn't be able to. At the time, I discovered that I could use a VPN that hid what I was doing, and that made me feel freer. Not that I was doing anything illegal, but I liked exploring the dark web, and there were things I'd rather no one knew I was looking at. I was looking about secret inventions, those that the government would want to cover up or confiscate from us. They were usually pretty harmless things, like a guy trying to set up a nuclear reactor in his room or someone who wanted to know how to make a time machine. In the end, the first didn't have the material needed to make the reactor, and the other didn't realize that time travel doesn't work according to real physics, but it was very entertaining to read this kind of stuff for me. But the truth is that the time travel thing caught my attention and I started looking for information about it. That's how I came across a strange link that took me to a page that didn't look like the typical ones you find in the deep web. I noticed that this page had a strange date. For some reason, the date was 3 days from now. I thought it might be a mistake, but I clicked it anyway and waited. It took a while, but when it opened, it looked like a minimalist version of a news page, but from a medium I had never heard of before. Most of the stories were normal and seemed to have the correct dates except for one. The snippet I saw told of a woman who was murdered in her home, and the police said it was no ordinary murder. The scene was as if a wild animal had torn her apart. The story said the murder happened on Friday night, November 14th in my city, but that didn't make any sense because it was only Tuesday. I checked the article again, thinking that maybe it had happened last week and they had simply made a mistake in putting the date, but I hadn't heard anything about it in town. If something as rare as that had happened, surely I would have heard about it. It would have been all over the news by now. After reading it again, I began to suspect that maybe it was a joke, that this was surely one of those sites that tease you with fake news, although all but that one did seem to be true, as I could corroborate it later on the regular portals. But why would anyone bother to make something like that up? It was a bit twisted, and this definitely had the look of one of those macabre pranks. I looked at my phone and noticed that I had less than an hour left before the library closed, so I had to finish my math homework, because there was no way I was going to do it at home. Days passed and I forgot about it. I was in the middle of exams at school and really didn't have time to think about anything else. Saturday morning, my phone rang bright and early. It was only 7 in the morning and I didn't feel like getting up. I was really exhausted, so whoever was calling me was going to get a yell for ruining my lazy morning. With narrowed eyes, I looked at my cell phone screen and realized it was Kylie, my best friend. Why on earth would she be calling me so early on a Saturday? That was a mystery. "Hey," I grunted as I answered, still trying to shake off the dream. "Wake up, man, you've got to see this. Remember the story you told me a couple of days ago?" I tried to remember as the remnants of the dream continued to weigh on my thoughts. "What story are you talking about, Kylie?" "The one about the woman who was killed here in town. The one you told me you read on the deep web that said a wild animal did it." "Oh yeah, I remember that." "What about it?" I replied as I rolled over in bed. "It happens to be dead, and it all happened just like you said." At that moment, the dream vanished completely, and I sat up in bed with a jump, confused and dazed. "What do you mean she's dead?" I asked, feeling more and more uneasy. "Just as you hear it. She's a woman who lives about 3 blocks from you, and she was killed last night just like the article said, and the police say the scene was gruesome, like she was attacked by a wild animal, just like you told me." "Oh hell, but you haven't told anyone what I told you, have you? I mean, anyone like your dad?" "No, not at all." "Why?" "Kylie's dad is a cop, and it suddenly dawned on me that if the police found out I knew about this before it happened, they might see me as a suspect." I heard Kylie laugh on the other end of the line. You didn't kill her, did you? For God's sake, Kylie, of course not. What kind of person do you think I am? I was just kidding, relax. Hey, I'm gonna have to hang up on you. I need to find a newspaper or catch up on the news. I need to do some more digging, Kylie said to me. Okay, please call me back, I replied, and hung up. After lying in bed for a while trying to process what I had just heard, I went to the local newspaper's website, and the lead story was about the murder. Although I didn't have the dark web story in front of me, I was pretty sure it was the same, word for word. It was Saturday and the library was closed because I didn't work on weekends. I had nowhere else to go to access the dark web, and besides, I couldn't risk doing something from home. I figured the best thing to do was to get up early on Monday and get to the library when they opened. I would have about an hour before I had to go to school. All Sunday I was filled with anxiety and the day took forever. As I read the story again, it all seemed so surreal. How could I possibly see an article about a murder that would happen 3 days later? It made my skin crawl just thinking about it, and maybe it was best to leave that matter alone. Monday morning, I couldn't wait to get to the library. Now here I was, in my usual dark corner, and to my surprise, Kylie also arrived at the library first thing in the morning and was sitting next to me, watching as I logged on to the dark web. As I moved over to the news site I had found days before, I looked at her and asked, "Are you sure you want to see this?" "Yeah, it probably won't be anything," she replied. "What are the odds that there will be another story about something happening in the future?" I had a good point, so I clicked on the link. Then the same news site opened and the third headline also talked about a murder. But now it was a recent event, one that happened a couple of days ago, which meant it was moving down the list of importance. I was about to click on the story to see if there was any news, but suddenly Kylie gasped, which made me turn to look at her. The date on the story was Wednesday night, but not the past, but the next. The headline read, "Serial Killer Strikes Again." The last thing I wanted to do was click it, but somehow I knew I had to. My fingers were trembling as I moved the mouse to the link, and I was about to press, but Kylie reached over and put her hand over mine. "Do we really want to see this?" she asked. I took my hand off the mouse and looked at her. "I don't know, Kylie. The other day I thought this was just a joke or something, but now it's obvious it's not." "What do you think it could be?" she muttered, to which I just shook my head because I really had no idea what we were dealing with. "Maybe the killer is behind this news site," she said, "and they're posting the stories of the crimes that they'll then make come true." "I can't believe I'm the only one seeing this. Surely there are others who have noticed and will call the police," I said, feeling quite uneasy. "It's the dark web, man. There are a lot of sick people here who live for this stuff." She looked at the screen and shook her head. "We have to see it," she said. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes, although it scares me," she replied as she clicked on the link. The story opened and we began to read. It told of an older man who lived alone on the east side of town and had been attacked and killed in his own home. Just as in the other case, he had been torn apart in the same way as the other woman. The police were completely baffled, and now the city was terrified, fearing that there was a new serial killer on the loose. Just below the title, I saw that the story had been seen by more than 100 people, which answered the question of whether we were the only ones who knew about this. "We should tell someone," Kylie said, but I replied, "Who? They'll just think we're crazy." "Are you forgetting the most obvious person to tell?" she told me. In a second, I realized who she was referring to and nearly smacked my forehead for not thinking of it sooner. Kylie pulled her phone out of her purse, switched it to speaker, and turned it down so only we could hear. "Police department, how can I help you?" the voice on the other end said. "I need to speak to Detective Hawkins." "One moment, please." "Good morning, this is Detective Hawkins," came the other end. "Dad, it's Kylie. Listen, I need you to come to the library. I have something you need to see, and it's important." I guess he noticed the seriousness in Kylie's voice because all he said was that he would be there in an instant, and sure enough, just 10 minutes later, he was walking through the library door. It's also that the library is only a couple of blocks from the station, and I thought she had probably walked here. When he arrived, he came around to the back and asked Kylie and me what was going on. "What's up, guys?" Kylie pointed to the screen and leaned over to read the story. "It's a joke, right?" she said. "I wish it was. Look at the date," Kylie replied. "What the fuck?" he said as he looked at the article, then reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone and took a picture of the screen, zooming in on the victim's name and address. "I don't know what this is about, but I'm going to find out. This sounds like someone is playing a prank, and with what happened to that woman a few days ago, I don't like it," he told Kylie. She looked at her daughter and then at me. "Tell me what's going on." At that point, I took a breath and swallowed my fear. Not just because I was panicking, but because I could tell he thought this was all a joke and I didn't want him to take it lightly. "Sir? That woman who died Friday night? I read a story about that last Wednesday just as you're looking at this article right now," I said. "Really?" he asked. "Yes. 3 days before she was murdered, this page posted the story, and we thought it was a joke until Saturday when I saw the news and realized it was real." I looked down, feeling guilty. I was struck by the thought that if I had mentioned something earlier, maybe that woman would still be alive. "I could have saved her," I muttered. Kylie's father put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed it. "You didn't do anything wrong," he assured me. "Patrick, how could you know that was true? Now I have to find a way to keep this guy safe and catch the monster behind this." He walked over to Kylie, gave her a kiss on the cheek and said, "Take care, young lady, I have to get to work." "Okay, Dad, get that guy," she replied with determination. Then we watched him walk away, turning on one of the shelves. Kylie looked at her phone and said, "I hate to say it, but we have to go, or we'll be late for class." "Classes? Who thinks about that at a time like this?" I replied as I shoved my computer into my backpack. We hurried out of the library, and as we walked through the door outside at the bottom of the stairs, we saw her father hurrying toward the station. Kylie put her arm through mine and said, "He's going to catch the killer, I'm sure, but we still have to go to school." The day at school was otherwise weird. I was completely disconnected from reality. I couldn't think about anything other than that demon page and the possible serial killer on the loose in town. Meanwhile, Kylie's father arrived at the victim's house in the evening and went into one of the back bedrooms, with unmarked police cars close behind. At about 8 p.m., the detective heard glass breaking in the next room and decided to wait. When he heard someone come out, he realized that whoever it was trying to walk as quietly as possible. And when they passed close to their hiding place, Kylie's dad quickly came out and started following the guy. When he got right behind him, he pressed his gun against the back of the suspect's head and told him it was over. "Don't bother looking for the old man because he hasn't been home in hours," he warned him. This guy came in ready to do what he wanted. He was carrying a backpack full of knives and blades, and was dressed in black from head to toe, including a ski mask that he surely thought made him look intimidating. But as soon as he felt the pressure of the cannon on his head, the man, instead of feeling fear, burst out laughing. "Do you really think this is over?" he said. "You are very wrong. This is just beginning," he replied with a very defiant attitude. Kylie's dad called for backup, and within seconds, they had the guy on the ground, handcuffed and ready to take him away. When they took off his ski mask, they realized he was a troubled kid who had been arrested before. This kid liked to create mayhem, but he had never actually committed murder. From the moment they handcuffed him until they put him in the police car, he kept cracking jokes. And me? Well, there I was, sitting in the library staring at the computer screen, wishing the story would change or just go away. Kylie was at home, praying as usual for her dad's safe return. And that night it seemed she needed a little extra time to ask God for an extra favor. Suddenly my phone vibrated. It was a text from her dad saying they had caught the suspect. I let out a sigh of relief and sank back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. Thank God, I thought. But as I lay there with my eyes closed, I heard a strange sound from my computer. Something popped up on the screen. Do you really think it would be that easy to catch me? You should have just sat there and just watched, like everyone else, but you decided to do more than watch. Now let's watch this." At that moment, the story on the screen began to change, word by word, sentence by sentence. It rewrote itself, and no longer had anything to do with the old man and his murder. When it finally adjusted completely, horror swept over me from head to toe. Then, with trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed Detective Hawkins' number, feeling the need to scream with every ring that rang. Finally, after a few seconds, he answered, "Hi, Patrick. Thanks for helping us." "Mr. Hawkins, the story changed. What does it say now?" he asked me. "The victim." I fell silent, trying to gather my strength before continuing. "The victim? It's Kylie." There was a long, tense silence on the other end, and then the call cut out. At that point, I closed the computer and rushed out of the library to Kylie's house. When I arrived, I found 2 squad cars parked out front, and when I walked in, I saw Detective Hawking with his back turned, kneeling in the doorway of Kylie's room, his hands clasped around the back of his neck, screaming his daughter's name. I quickly ran to where he was, and as I looked at what was in front of me, my heart stopped. It was Kylie, or rather her body parts strewn all over the room, which was covered with her blood. Kylie's murder was the last such murder recorded in the city. After this, the page disappeared from the dark web without a trace, and despite all the efforts of Detective Hawking, the murderer was never found. It has been almost 8 years since these events, and there is not a single day that goes by that I don't think of my friend and feel terribly guilty for what happened to her. Since then, I have never gone back to surfing the deep web, and I recommend that you don't either. I just graduated from college and was up to my neck in student debt, so I decided to move in with my older brother Elvis, until I could find a place of my own. The last time I saw him was 5 years ago at his wedding. He married a broad that I had a bad feeling about. Her name was Amalia, and from the first moment I met her, I knew she was a taker. But I didn't have the guts to say anything at the time. Since he got married, Elvis cut off almost all contact with me and the family, all because of Amalia, so I didn't see him again until they separated. But still, he wasn't the same. He seemed to have his soul in 1,000 pieces. The truth is that I didn't think he would accept me staying with him, but he did, and I hoped that this would help us reconnect. But I was very wrong. After a month of living there, I had only seen him 4 or 5 times at most. He was always stuck in his office, and when he came out, he hardly ever interacted with me, as if I were a stranger. We didn't even share meals. I always ate dinner alone at the table, while he ate alone in his room or in his office. One night, while I was in the kitchen, he came downstairs and told me he had to go out to run some errands. I thought it was strange because it was almost 11 o'clock. I tried to ask him where he was going, but he said he didn't have time to explain, reminded me not to go into his office, and then ran out. The next day, I noticed that his car was not in the garage, which made me think that maybe he had not arrived last night. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. I heard his cell phone ringing in the office, which meant he had forgotten it there, so I wanted to go in. I knew I shouldn't do it because he had forbidden me to, but the worry got the better of me, so I walked up to the door and turned the handle, surprised that it was open. The light was off and everything was dark, but his computer screen was glowing, so I walked over, and there I saw that he had a weird dark web page open. It was a mostly black site with various weapon icons from ropes to explosives. I thought that was pretty strange. Then I saw that 4 weapons were highlighted: a bat with nails, chains with shackles, 2 knives, and a blowtorch. There was an address at the bottom and a price of $600 in bitcoins. Seeing this gave me chills. What was my brother up to? It was really disturbing, but mostly strange. He was not a violent person, and as far as I knew, he spent all his time working. I quickly took a picture of the screen with my cell phone and ran to my car. If my brother was involved in something shady, I had to intervene. With a bit of determination, I headed to the address, which turned out to be an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place looked deserted except for Elvis's car hidden behind some dumpsters. I immediately thought I should have called the police. This was not a safe place, but it was too late. I had to get inside and find out what was going on, so I crawled through a hole in the chain link fence and found a small entrance that was open. I went in slowly and tried not to make any noise. Once inside the warehouse, I saw that it was divided into several dark rooms filled with old junk and metal cages. Everything was eerily quiet, except for a soft clinking of chains coming from the back. I followed the sound until I came to a large metal door. Then I plucked up my courage and took a deep breath before I jerked my way inside. But as I did so, I froze completely. In that space, there was a woman chained to the floor, half of her face burned off. Even though her face was shattered, I recognized her instantly. It was Elvis's ex, Amalia. She was so scared that she didn't realize I was there. But the most terrifying thing was what I saw right in front of her. A table full of the creepy weapons she had ordered through that dark web page. The knives, the baseball bat with nails, and a little further there was the blowtorch, which when I saw Amalia's face I knew immediately what she used it for. At that moment, horror and disgust completely invaded me, and I was paralyzed. What kind of monster was Elvis? Suddenly, seeing that I was there, Amalia began to move in desperation, begging for help. That's when I noticed that she was missing 2 fingers, and that really made my blood boil. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe the level of evil and sadism that was in my brother's mind. I just couldn't recognize him. Who was Elvis, really? I immediately picked up the key that was on the table and ran to it. I had to free her. I couldn't leave her there. I leaned over and asked her what was wrong, but I didn't understand anything she said. However, it was clear that my brother had tortured her in horrible ways. As I was releasing her, Amalia gestured to a door next door, and I assumed that was where he was. I had to get her out before he returned. After what I had just seen, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he did the same to me if he discovered me in that place. My hands were shaking as I undid the chains and helped her to her feet. She mumbled something I didn't understand, but she sounded in a hurry, so I was guiding her towards the exit as fast as I could. But then I heard the door open behind us. Elvis appeared and came running toward us. I was trying to convince myself that he wouldn't hurt me, but after what Amalia had done to him, I was pretty sure he wouldn't shake his pulse with me either. So without thinking twice, I let go of Amalia and ran to the table. I grabbed the spiked baseball bat and slammed it into his stomach. My intention was just to stop him, but I was so nervous that I hit him harder than I wanted to, and the nails buried all the way in and Elvis collapsed to the floor. I felt terrible, like I had killed my own brother, but it was done, and we had to get out of there as soon as possible. As soon as we got out of the warehouse, I called 911 and advised of the situation, stressing that they needed to send an ambulance fast. In the meantime, I went to the nearest hospital and left Amalia there to get help. When the police arrived at the warehouse, my brother was gone, but they arrested him later that night while he was trying to flee the city. He was immediately taken to the emergency room and luckily did not die, although the wound I caused him with the bat was quite delicate. In fact, the doctors said that he was lucky that the police had arrested him and taken him to the hospital, because a few more minutes and he did not count it. It turned out that Amalia had asked him for a divorce because she had met a boy on a trip she had recently taken to Germany and had fallen in love with him. This infuriated my brother, and instead of just letting her go, as any normal person would do, he decided to kidnap her and hold her captive in that horrible place, subjecting her to all kinds of inhumane treatment, and the deep web provided him with everything he needed to carry out his macabre plan. I was completely disgusted to learn what had happened, and my parents were totally devastated. No one expected anything so horrible from Elvis. My brother was sentenced to 22 years in prison, and in all this time, 5 years since he was arrested, I haven't had the courage to go see him, and I don't know if I ever will, because after knowing everything that happened, I no longer consider him my brother. turns out that one day, while I was in college, a friend of mine, Sam, pitched the idea that we should explore the dark web to see if we could find some things to entertain ourselves. Up until that point, I knew nothing about it. I had only heard about it a few times, but I had never entered the dark web, and frankly, I had no idea that this harmless search would turn into something much more complicated than I imagined. After that first exploration with my friend, I realized that the feeling of anonymity was something I had never experienced before, so I downloaded the Tor browser onto my laptop and continued exploring on my own. I started with simple things, looking for fairly common forums, paranormal stuff, conspiracy theories and stuff, but after a while a comment caught my attention. It was from someone on a post talking about getting revenge on their ex, and amidst a sea of typical hitman comments and offers to hack into other people's devices, there was one such comment that caught my attention. This one said something like, "If you really want them to feel your revenge, click here. I'll be waiting for you." I didn't really have anyone I wanted revenge on, but I was very curious to know what that was all about, so I clicked. The screen went black at first and it was taking too long, but when I was almost giving up hope, I saw a little blinking dot in the bottom corner, so I slid the cursor over it, and in one click, the forum came to life. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. As soon as I opened it, I knew this was another level. The messages ranged from people bidding for someone's service to others offering crazy things like paperless adoptions. I spent the next 2 weeks immersed in the dark web, surfing that forum every night, and every time I refreshed, the number of new messages was overwhelming. The amount of users in that place surprised me, considering how difficult it was to get there. I soon started interacting in the comments, posting absurd responses that only sought to make me laugh. But as I felt more anonymous, I became bolder, even replying to some posts that sent shivers down my spine. That's when I saw a post from a hired gun looking for work in my area. Without a second thought, I sent him a message. I had to check if he was real, so I made up a story about the neighbor across the street from my house and some gossip he was saying about me, saying I needed help getting him out of the way. Yeah, complete bullshit, I know that now. It took a while for the guy to respond, but when he did, instead of a typical message, a notepad opened up on my computer. Somehow, he had taken control of my PC and started typing in a program that looked totally different. I froze. This was supposed to be a way to verify that it was authentic, but the fact that it could access my computer scared me so much that I turned the screen off. However, it came back on, showing me a direct message on the notepad. "Do you still want me to take care of your problem? My fee is $4,000 for the first one. Then I charge according to the situation." I stood there, mouth agape, staring at the screen, when a new message came through and chilled my blood. "I can be at your address in an hour. I'm only a few blocks away." Wait, how did I know where I was? I hurriedly typed that I wanted to get out of this, that I'd rather work it out some other way, but this guy dismissed my pleas with a simple, "See you soon." It was like I was hit with a bucket of cold water. On impulse, I lunged for the light switch, leaving the room in darkness. Then, I went to the window and opened the curtains a little, looking at the street illuminated only by the moon. I barely breathed for fear of making noise, and after what felt like an eternity, I saw an old dark car glide down our alley. Living on a dead-end street meant that almost no one passed by for no reason. The car moved forward silently and stopped right at the curb across the street, no more than 3 houses away. There was a light on in the back room of my neighbor's house, and I thought for sure someone was coming downstairs for a drink. But it didn't cross my mind that I was now in the middle of this madness. I'd mentioned to the hitman that the neighbors lived across the street, and I never thought about the 2 teenage boys who were there, nor their parents, who were very nice people. My God, what had I done? Just as I was caught up in my thoughts, the door of the old black sedan opened and a guy came out, dressed in dark brown overalls. My heart jumped into my throat at that instant. I saw him turn his head toward my window and hold my gaze for a moment, before heading toward the neighbor's house. I gawked as he walked in, and at that moment the light in the back room went out, followed by the stairwell light which briefly illuminated. Then, when the mysterious guy came back into the room, they turned on the light in the back bedroom and then the master bedroom light. I could see the shadows moving in panic as the lights flickered throughout the house. The kitchen light came on next, and then the front door opened. That's when I saw one of the teenagers come out covered in blood. He collapsed to the floor and started crawling, trying to run away, but suddenly the man appeared behind him, enjoying his panic with a macabre smile on his lips. And in the blink of an eye, he pointed his gun at him and shot him at point-blank range. I watched as the boy stopped moving, and my heart wanted to burst out of my mouth. I was shaking and felt an oppressive pain in my chest. I didn't know if it was because of the enormous guilt I felt or because of the frantic beating of my heart. Once it was done, the guy reached into his pocket and pulled out a smartphone. At that instant, my computer screen came alive again, and another message appeared on the notepad. "Money in the morning or I'll visit you later." At that moment, my heart stopped. I didn't even have that money, and now I was in a huge mess. But suddenly, something unexpected happened. As the guy put the phone away and walked to the car, Mr. Miller appeared in the doorway, covered in blood but standing with a gun in his hand. In the blink of an eye, he pointed it at the guy in overalls and pulled the trigger about 7 times until he ran out of bullets and then collapsed over his son's limp body. The killer did not have time to react and fell prone on the wax. At that moment, several neighbors began to come out of their houses to see what had happened, but I could not. I was not able to go out and confront Mr. Miller. Instead, I called 911 and waited at home for them to arrive. Fortunately, the medics were able to save Mr. Miller and his older son, but his wife and young son, who the guy shot in the driveway, were not as lucky. It was a horrible tragedy, and it was all my fault for an idiot. The guy was later identified as a Serbian immigrant who was wanted for various crimes, but the cops were never able to figure out what the motive was for his attack on the Miller family. That is a painful secret that I will carry with me until I die, or until the guilt finishes consuming me and I decide to talk. For now, I don't have the courage, but that yes, since that day, I stay away from the dark web. I felt too comfortable surfing the deep web until because of this, my life went to hell. This is the story that changed my life and ruined me completely. It all started when I decided to download the Tor browser and do some exploring. At the time, I was an idiot teenager and I was with my friend, so you can imagine how reckless we were. We stayed up all night, and in the wee hours of the morning, we started watching YouTube videos of scary experiences from the dark web. Never in my worst dreams would I have imagined that this would lead to us having a spooky experience we would never forget. "That's scary," Daniel said as we watched a video in which the person talked about seeing a live beheading on the dark web. And of course that gave him an idea. "What do you say we try it ourselves?" he said. And I, being the complete dummy that I was, decided it was a great idea. It was a horrible decision, I know, but at the time I was too caught up in the excitement, so without much thought, I downloaded Tor onto my PC, and in the blink of an eye I was ready, so I went looking for obscure sites, but I didn't find anything too scary. Weeks went by and I kept looking, but I only came across bloody images and weird stuff, nothing compared to the stories we had heard. I must confess that I was feeling more and more confident, and that night in particular, I was at a sleepover with Daniel. I remember we decided to investigate chat forums on the dark web. That's when we found an online chat site that we found interesting. "Cool, right?" I said. But I must admit it was a big mistake. Daniel had a bad feeling before we clicked, and now I get it. But I was too into the adventure, so I convinced him to get us into that forum. "Come on, it's safe," I said. What could go wrong? I clicked without wasting any time and was immediately bombarded by a bunch of pop-up ads. My computer, which was already an oldie, started to get sluggish. I thought it couldn't be that bad. After all, they were just silly ads. Once I managed to close them, I came across a page that said, "Welcome to free chat. Click start when you're ready." I waited for quite a while until our first user finally appeared, Darkman666. Daniel's camera came on, but his was still off, so we decided to jump out of that conversation. We met several other users, but many times they were just blank screens. On our second interaction with Darkman 666, we found ourselves in an empty room. His camera was indeed on now, but there was no one there. Suddenly, a message popped up in the chat box. Darkman 666 is typing. What should I tell him? I asked Daniel, but he looked nervous, as if he didn't feel like answering. Hello, I typed as if he was calling me Alex, hoping there would be no reply. But after a while, Darkman's notification popped up again. Where do you live? That made us both very uneasy, so I didn't hesitate to open another tab and delete all my browsing history quickly. Then, tired, we fell asleep, even though the computer was still on in front of us, which was a monumental mistake. It was around 3:30 in the morning when I woke up. The computer was still active and the chat page was still open, but the screen looked darker and weirder. Instantly, I woke Daniel up and we were completely frozen in fear as I approached the screen. Look, we're talking to Darkman, I whispered. But something wasn't right. The camera showed us both smiling, but neither I nor Daniel remembered laughing at all. Suddenly, a deep male voice pronounced our address and fear paralyzed us completely. We both began to tremble, unable to do anything. It was like a nightmare, but the worst part was that the camera didn't just show Daniel and me. There was a dark shadow of a man behind us, clearly about 2 meters away. We turned immediately but saw no one. The room was dark, but we could not see anyone behind us. But this figure was visible on the screen. As the individual approached on the transmission, a gun appeared in his hands and he raised it as we stood there, caught in a smile that we didn't understand. That smile was creepy, something I had never seen before. When the man pointed the gun at me, it was as if the world stopped. I felt my stomach churning and adrenaline rushing through me, and in a panic I punched the computer, shredding it like butter. My heart was beating a mile a minute and I put my hands to my head, terrified. Daniel was pale and paralyzed as if he had seen a ghost. At that moment I grabbed the baseball bat that was on top of my closet and in a fit of madness I smashed the computer to smithereens. And at that moment I began to sob. To this day I still get chills thinking about the dark web, especially at that terrifying moment. This was 9 years ago, and since then Daniel and I never touched the subject of this incident again, for which I have no explanation that really works. I just want to forget about it. But one thing I learned from all this: never go on the dark web, you never know who is watching you.